Welcome to John Marshall Law School, specifically this evening event for the Republican Student Association at John Marshall. Our guest speaker tonight is author Charles Love. He is the author of the well-known book, The Logic, The Truth About Blacks in the Republican Party, which suggest all of you pick up at some point. And he's here to tell us about his new book. So Charles, take it away.
Thanks. No, thank you. My new book is called We Want Equality, How the Fight for Equality Gave Way to Preference. So since usually I'm talking to people who don't know anything about me or the book, I usually talk about why I wrote the book, the premise of the book, who the target audience is, and what I try to accomplish. And then I try to leave enough time at the end to ask questions. So keep that in mind as I go through. So originally, I thought about, when I started to write the book, the concept was I'm listening to the news from pretty much the end of Obama's second term to when Trump ran, and now obviously after he became president, listening to people go back and forth about issues that's facing the country and what the problems are. And I didn't feel like people were really talking about, had a grasp on what the real problems were. So a lot of the talk was policy, you know, taxes, immigration, things of that nature, which are important, or issues where there's like fear-mongering, like, you know, attacks on each other. But what I felt that was kind of bubbling under the surface was the biggest problem, which is a cultural shift that I thought was dramatically moving to the right and was a problem that was worse than everything else, and no one was addressing it or looking at ways we could stop it. So that culture shift, I believe, started years ago, far before Obama or Trump were running for office, but it seemed to accelerate after that. So I wanted to kind of take a look at the problems and figure a way to explain it in a way that people will understand how, regardless of what the policy problems are, if we don't address the cultural shift, that it won't really make a difference who's in office. So I call it equality, even though I'm talking about culture, because if you look at the way the left attacks most of the issues, they kind of cloak all of their issues in equality. So when they talk about the fight that these things that they have an issue with that they're trying to correct, they talk about it from a premise of inequality, right? So they say that we have unequal treatment of different genders, of race. They talk about income inequality and things of that nature. So their effort is kind of described in, we try to correct these problems and make everything equal. So, but really their movement and their actions are more cultural. So I take the same approach in the book. So I say, we want equality in the sense that those, as we call them, the social justice warriors, are arguing for equality and trying to improve the situation for groups of people, because that's something that everybody can get on board for. But when you look at the way they're fighting for it and what they're asking for, there's no way it's ever really going to happen, because either they're not really looking for equality or they're not taking into account human nature, right? So there's always going to be people who will treat other people badly, and there's no real way to police it. So you have to look at it that way and address them in that same fashion. So so most of my target audience, let's look at it that way, is everybody who's not on the left. So a lot of people will say they're on the left, but they really don't do a distinction between left and liberal, right? So there are people who feel that I'm on the left because I don't agree with Republicans. So, but that used to be the case, but now things are different. So you could disagree with Republicans on policy issues, but you may not necessarily think, for instance, it's okay to shout people out of a restaurant, or, you know, attack them physically, or say, you don't agree with me, therefore you're a Hitler, or you're a racist, or you're a fascist. So you have to kind of ask probing questions and drill down to find out where they really lie on the political spectrum. So this is what I tend to do in the book. So I'm really addressing three separate groups, so I explain the information and approach it in three different ways. So there's very little for the left. So most people who feel that they truly are on the far left and they agree with that group won't agree with what I say in the book and will probably be upset. But even to them, I would say that if you really want equality, then you need to change the approach that you use to get what you want. And I use a couple examples, like one being voter ID laws is one that I commonly use. So they say that the people who want to have voter ID laws are racist, and the laws themselves are racist, and they disproportionately affect minority people. So instead of arguing with them about whether that's the case, which most people on the right would say, well, that's not fair because you need an ID to go here or to do this, which may be true, but you're not going to win an argument with somebody who thinks that your intent is racist. You're not going to win that argument by proving that, well, look here and there and look at other places you need IDs. So the better question is to ask them, if you really think the voter ID laws are racist, what is the best approach to fix that problem, right? Because what they do currently is they get a protest sign and they go out and they march, right? And they go to the politicians who are trying to implement these voter ID laws, and they demand that they get rid of the laws because the laws are racist. But one could argue that the better way to channel that energy would be to go to their friends and family or raise funds or go to the many celebrities and businesses who are, friendly to liberals and say, let's pool our money and go to the South or to these areas where they say people can't afford to get IDs or don't have transportation, and provide them with the stuff that they need in order to do that, and then they'll have IDs and the problem will be solved. So it's almost like instead of solving the problem, you rather just yell and be upset. So even to them, they can take stuff from this and say, okay, well, maybe there's a better approach to get to the things that we want. But the bulk of the book is addressed to those people who consider themselves in the middle, who are left or right leaning, but not, conservatives, and to conservatives. And to the conservatives, I say that now I consider myself a conservative, so I agree with them on policies. But I have to admit that their approach and their delivery of their beliefs are kind of flawed. And I guess it kind of depends on who they're talking to, right? So we spend our time, like we were mentioning Facebook earlier. So if you spend a lot of your time on social media, you get in this echo chamber. So you mention stuff, and then a lot of people agree with you. Those same, 10 to 20 people will kind of like your post, and they'll say, yeah, I agree with you. But you're not changing any minds because those people already agree with you, and you're not going out there and reaching out to anyone else. So when I wrote the first book, like Joe mentioned, The Logic, the Truth About Blacks in the Republican Party, I constantly went to Republicans, many of them in office, and challenged them to take their message outside of their little circle. So they run for office, they win office, or they lose, so they run again. Or they go to functions and dinners and charitable events that are put on by conservatives, which is fine, right? You gotta strengthen your base. But when are you talking to those people who may agree with you, but don't have the opportunity to ever hear what you believe? I grew up in Gary, Indiana, and myself and everybody I knew was a Democrat. As I got older and said I wanted to kind of be open and hear both sides, the Republicans would, the Democrats would come and they'll tell me what their policies are. Some I'd agree with, most I didn't agree with, and then they'll tell me about Republicans and they'll say all these nasty things. And I'll say, well, I have nothing to base that on. Let's see if that's true. And then I turn to see what the Republican candidate had to say, and it was non-existent because they never showed up. Now, I know that it's costly to run elections, and they were doing a cost-benefit analysis and saying, we don't have the money and the resources to go into areas where 95% of the people aren't going to vote for us. But if they don't show up, they're never going to get any of the other 5% to vote for them. But the problem extends beyond the election, because when they're not running, they still don't go. So you have a large swath of people who never hear their views. They only hear Republican or conservative views from Democrats. So you only hear the negatives of it, right? So if I'm, Nancy Pelosi, and you're in my district and you want to know what the Republicans feel about an issue, I'll tell you. I'm going to tell you that, well, you don't want to vote for them because really they don't care about you. They're passing laws that are intent on hurting you and hurting your family. And, you're not going to sit back and think, well, rationally it doesn't make sense that there's this whole swath of the population that's, out to get me, but you're not going to think that way. And they're not there to defend themselves. So I, constantly implore them to go out and speak. And it's an uphill battle. Obviously, I'm still fighting that fight. But to them, I say you need to communicate your views better. Look at it this way. So regardless of your political beliefs, whether you're on the left or you're on the right, you believe that what your what you want to do, the policies you want to put in place, and your view of America is right. We all think we're right. So if you think you're right, you really shouldn't need to be mad or to yell to get your point across, right? So we should all be able to say these are our views. I'll express mine, you express yours, and then let people decide, right? Which means you have to show up, first of all. But a lot of what you hear is libtards, names, or liberals are stupid and they don't know anything. No, just present the information to them and hear what they have to say. But first you got to have the conversation. So the last chapter is kind of like a manual to them as to how to speak to people who are in the middle or who don't agree with you, right? Now, it's not going to work for anybody who's extreme left, but you already kind of wrote them off. They're not going to listen to you. They're not going to believe you. But to those people who are open to hear what you have to say, you have to find a way to present it to them. And so my biggest point method is called to give them their argument. That's the main goal here. So if you talk about an issue like, let's say, immigration. So if I was not necessarily debating, but having a conversation with someone who was left-leaning on immigration, and they, because most of the elected officials on the Democrat side say they want to secure the border. You look it up. You look up Hillary Clinton and Nancy Pelosi. They all say, of course I want to secure the border. I mean, it's important to our country. I just think we need to do it compassionately. So the question for that conservative who has an opportunity to have a conversation with someone like that is define compassionately to me, right? And if they can't give you a definition, ask them questions. So okay, let's start with a baseline. So we both agree that we want to secure the border. Is it okay for us to deport every illegal who comes across the border immediately when they come across the border? Now, the majority of them would say no, right? So then you say, okay, so we can't deport them immediately. And we already know that we don't want to separate the family, so we can't separate them. And okay, so then you just go down the list of other things. Do we send additional funding to the Border Patrol? They'll say no, right? Do we, when we catch people on something else, like they just get something, nothing criminal, like a ticket. And since we have them on a ticket and we find out they're illegal, do we deport them? No. Should we prioritize English as a second language and students of children of illegals in public schools? Yes. Should we allow them to get driver's licenses? Yes. And then you go down the list. And as you ask these questions, you ask enough of them and you build, a kind of framework of their belief. And then you just have to ask, well, in that case, exactly how do you see border control working? Because you started the conversation with, you do agree that there should be border control, but every idea we threw out there to control the border, you said no to, right? And then if I say, well, give me yours, they really don't have any. So the natural assumption is that they don't really want to secure the border. But I don't really hear conservatives approach it that way. So I didn't call them any names. I didn't say that you're trying to, take all the illegals and put them in your basement and give them sanctuary. But at the same time, you never gave me any examples of security that you wanted to do, right? So you can go through that on any issue, right? Whether it be guns or anything. They all say the same thing. We want common sense gun control. But most of them they're not pro-gun, so they don't own guns, so they don't know what the current laws are. So I've had many conversations with people, and I say, well, what do you want to do? And the first initial things they say are already laws. But they didn't know because they've never tried to go buy a gun. But I'm not going to sit here and say something negative about them. I'm just going to allow them to get the information. So a lot of times what happens, so there are sections in the book that I call the logic board. So we go to the board, we use an example, and we say, and it's just laid out in kind of like an if-then premise. So if you say, do we agree that this should be against the law? And we both agree. So you see where you meet up. We agree that should be against the law. Okay, so now what we need to decide, what do we do with that item? So we agree it's against the law. Do we give them jail time? Do we let them off? Do we do this, right? So if you agree on the second item, so then my question is so how is the person who's promoting the law racist? Right? Most of the reply is because it disproportionately affects a certain group. And they're probably right in most of those cases. But how do you write a law? I think the example I used in the book was carjacking. So I say, should carjacking be legal? And they say, yes. Should it be jail time? Of course, because you're physically taking property, but you're also dragging somebody out of a car. That should bring with it jail time. Okay, so if somebody wants to say, let's say some conservative elected official says he wants to do a minimum of 20 years for carjacking. And then you have protesters who say, well, that's racist because most of the people who are doing this crime are black or Hispanic or whatever the statistics say. So you're disproportionately affecting the black community there, which is true if that happens to be the case with that criminal, but you still have to do something about the crime. We agree that it's a crime, we agree that it's violent. So are we singling out, or is that politician singling out blacks, or does it just happen to be that it affects blacks because blacks are doing that crime? I like to ask them often, do you realize that when you address these issues, it's okay to be concerned about how it affects people and maybe want to give a guy a break here or there and think that it's unfair, that somebody needs to do something about that group of people. But I never hear them question or think about the person who got carjacked. Do you ever take a moment? Shouldn't the thought process and the concern be at the very least equal between the person who carjacked someone but had a rough life and didn't have a fair shake, and we should have some sympathy for him, and the person he drug out on the street at gunpoint? I just feel that currently all of the focus tends to be on the carjacker, not the person who was violated, right? So I ask those questions to see kind of where we gauge, and we find out that a lot of these things we agree on, right? So, yeah, well, maybe I didn't think about it that way. Well, you'll never get them to say that if you don't talk to them like human beings. Now, granted, the current climate doesn't really lend itself to that both ways, but it all depends on who you're talking to. So, like, obviously, if somebody, when I get into that conversation and they're just far left, like, no, I think people can't be illegal because you can't have laws around people and you can't have borders. So my response to that is simple. Okay, I'm not going to change your mind. You have the right to have that view, and I'm not going to debate you because we're never going to meet. But now I know where you stand, right? So, I tell the conservatives, your goal should be like in my book. My goal is threefold. My goal, ideally, obviously, is to convert everybody and have everybody agree with me, which is never going to happen. But you got to have the goal. But beyond that, it's to say, when I speak to somebody who doesn't agree with me politically, look at the climate now, right? What we have is, and a lot of it started being aimed at Trump, but it's just everybody who's conservative now. So if you're a conservative, you're automatically a Trump supporter. Even though we literally gave a large group of people the name Never Trumper, you're a Trump supporter, right? And then it's like, and Trump is a Nazi, therefore you're a Nazi. Right? So it shuts down all conversation, but also it's some of these people you know personally. So it's not the social media thing I'm concerned about. It's the people who have friends and family who helped raise them, and when they were down and out, they gave them money, and and they brought them everywhere and wrote them sweet letters about how wonderful they were in their life. And they pivoted on a dime, and now their cousin and their friend and their uncle are racist, right? It's the guy who voted for Obama twice, and then he said it didn't work, so I'm going to vote for Trump, and now he's a racist. So why wasn't he a racist 4 years ago? I mean, there's no rationale in this, right? But so my next objective, if I can't convert people to believe what I believe, is to at least walk away saying, everybody who doesn't share my belief, it's wrong for me to just assume things about them, whether it be a racist or, that they're against the poor, they're against blacks or whatever. People always ask me, because I'm black, what kind of feedback do I get? And it's odd. Up until recently, my first book came out 5 years ago. And when I wrote that book, it was pretty much all positive. People would question, but I had no negative issues at all. And even now, but now I started to get the things that black conservatives have been saying for years. See, I didn't get it because I don't talk like they do. I don't attack people. I just ask questions, right? I just sit back and say, let's have a conversation. But even now, I go to different groups where everybody's not conservative, or I post stuff on Facebook. And granted, it's stuff that the left won't agree with, but it's not, mean. Like, I'm trying to remember one. I said something about the Republican Party being founded to abolish slavery, and Democrat Party being founded to take over an election, right? Which, if they went back and did history, they'll find out the whole thing between John Quincy Adams and Jackson, and they'll understand what I'm talking about. But you can disagree with it. Nobody disagrees with the first part, right? So everybody knows why the Republican Party started. They say they switched, they have different views after the fact, but everybody agrees why they were founded. So I was just pointing out why the Democrat Party was founded, because most people didn't know. And I got coon, nigger, all these kind of things that I'd never heard before from that post. Nothing Trump, just that post. And most of these people were black. So I'm like, what are you upset about? I mean, it's kind of like the Kanye thing. And they say that conservatives were being hypocritical because Laura Ingraham told LeBron to shut up and dribble, and now they're all, praising Kanye. And I kind of think a lot of people do on both sides, but mainly the people on the left kind of missed the point there, right? I was one of those people that told everybody to just shut up and sing, dance, and act because I don't really need to hear your views. Not because they don't have a right to do it. I just want you to be educated on the issue when you talk. Because look at other issues. Most entertainers, when they find a pet project, right? Like if they find out something about child trafficking and they care about that and they want to do something about that, they learn about it, right? They go do some travels, they do some research, and they start putting their money and time in it. But they don't do that with politics at large. They just say, they come out behind a podium and say, I hate that guy. So it's not, I don't want to hear their view because it's not an informed view. If it's an informed view, by all means, let us hear it. But it's beyond that. Yes, the conservatives told LeBron to shut up, right? But it wasn't all, but it was some. But LeBron, like I said, was making personal attacks. He wasn't saying, we shouldn't be tied to one party, or we should be open-minded. He was saying Donald Trump is an effing racist kind of deal. And he was using profanity, the same thing. But Kanye comes out and said, I love Trump. And now it's, he has a mental condition. He's crazy. His performance was a minstrel show and all that kind of stuff, right? And you can't. They don't. They're so illogical when they get that far left that they compare things that are not equal in either scope or in severity. So another example. So we hear all the attacks on the conservatives as far as physical attacks, shouting them out of restaurants, you're a racist, this, that, or the other. So somebody will say, well, the right just didn't do that to the left. And they'll go to Obama and say, let me show you a myriad of examples from when Obama was president. And it's, Obama's from Kenya, you're missing your village idiot. Respectful? No. Same as punching somebody? Probably not, right? Or they'll say, here's a post where they said that they talked about the rodeo clown, or they said Obama broke all these laws, or Trump said that where's his birth certificate kind of thing. You can say that stuff was disrespectful. I don't think how you can logically and fairly say it's the same as punching a guy, like the congressman in Minnesota, Republican congressman who just got a concussion yesterday, or the members who got shot at the park. It's not the same as saying things about somebody. So, and the people are different. So the difference is when you look at those attacks from the conservative standpoint, they're usually unknown people that don't have a platform, sending a post from their mother's basement. On the left, we have Nobel Prize winning economists sending posts like this. We have New York Times journalists, right? Anchors on CNN. It's not the same thing, right? So you can't say an A-list actor. You can't say Robert De Niro coming out at a simple award show, right? Giving an award for the Tonys and flipping the birds and saying, before I say anything else, I want to say F Trump. It's the same as somebody with 2 Twitter followers sitting at home saying the N-word for Obama. It's not the same thing. And if you can't tell the difference, there's something wrong with you, right? So, but then also I address those who are in the center, because what you get, so I tell somebody I'm a conservative today, and the first thing out of their mouth is, so what do you think about Trump? What are your views on Trump? Before I get into whether we can have a conversation, I need to gauge you. I need to know if you're a Trump conservative, because then you're racist, I don't want to talk to you, and you're a coon, and you're all these other things. Or if you're an anti-Trump Republican, then you're cool, and maybe I can talk to you. I say it doesn't really matter. The way it should go is, if I have to own Trump and all the bad that comes with Trump, then you have to own the left if you're not on the left. You're a liberal, you're a Democrat, you're not on the left, you're not on the right, you're independent and you're left-leaning. If I have to own Trump, you have to own Antifa. You can't have it both ways. You can't say your crazies are yours, but the other crazies are yours too, right? Or excuse them. So it doesn't work that way. So at some point, because let's face it, if we're really trying to, because I go back to the cultural shift is the problem. It's been happening since the 80s and 90s, and it's been accelerated. They use Trump as an excuse and as an example. Those, even though they're few people, they're powerful people, and they have an agenda, and it's their point to move the culture to the left. So they love the fact that they have Trump. So now they got something they can point to. They can say, see, we have to be over the top because Trump's so bad. Or they say, Trump did it, so we have to, match fire with fire. But the culture was moving with or without Trump. This isn't new, right? So we had intact families, right? We had the majority of children being born to both parents and living with both parents for years. That was the norm for centuries. And then in the 60s, it started to shift. But in the book I referenced the Moynihan report, as a lot of people do. But one of the key reasons is he was talking about an upcoming crisis in the black community, saying that they had 27, I think it was at the time, percent single parents households, and if it got worse, it was going to be a crisis. And people talk about it now, like look at it now, it's tripled over the time, and yes, it's really bad, and it's brought about all these bad things. But what they missed, I think I saw a news article today, but prior to today, they missed the real takeaway from that in today's time. And that is, at the time, it was about 27%, I think I said, for black households. It was only 3% for white households. And today, the report came out saying it's almost 50%. So the culture's moving left for everybody. It's just moving faster for some groups and slower for other groups, right? So, but it's not just that. It's like you can take any of the hot button left issues. So the gender thing. So there's a lot of a push on gay marriage and gay equality and transgenders. And obviously, there's some really strong views on those topics. But my point is, even if you think that you need to be affirming and open to everyone, that's fine and that's your view. But there's a difference between saying somebody on the right saying transgenders are evil and they need to be whatever, tarred and feathers, or whatever the left thinks that they're saying, which there's no one out there saying that, but if that's your view. But there's a difference, there's a gray area between that and your 7-year-old coming to you and saying, I want a sex change, and you just say, okay, let's go. Right? What's wrong with saying you're too young to know? Why don't you wait until you're older? That's not anti-trans, but it's also not, you need to go do it, right? I had another example I wanted to use here. There was, another thing is the racism issue, right? So obviously there's a race issue. There are racists. And a lot of people say those on the right don't believe that there's racists, especially black conservatives. And it's not that they don't agree that they're racist. We only differ on two areas: how many there are and how we're going to allow them to impact us, right? So black conservatives say, yeah, they're racist, but I'm not going to spend my whole time focused on it or sitting in the corner, curled up in a ball. And I don't think it's 90% of the population, right? That's the only difference. It's not like we're saying it doesn't exist. But people are really selective when they use it or how they address it, right? So I just came back from vacation in New Orleans, and I thought about this was pretty interesting. So we always talk about colonialism and the white European races in America, but we don't look at it in context. So there's a lot of context and a lot of history in the books to kind of set the foundation at the beginning. And one of the things in recent news that I thought was interesting, so back in June, New Orleans is celebrating its 300th anniversary. So back in June, they invited the King and Queen of Spain there. They gave them the key to the city, they took them around, and the mayor said in her speech with the King and Queen that New Orleans would not be where it is without Spain. So I find that interesting because the left is always talking about the white privilege and the racism and the white European colonialists who took over the country. But here they are with the King and Queen of Spain, giving them the key, lauding the group that took over the country, the people who actually owned the slave ships, the country who pretty much took all of Latin America and the Caribbean and Central America and most of that swath of the Gulf, right? But so that basically it looks like they're forgiving Spain, they're forgiving France, and they're forgiving Great Britain, yet U.S. needs to keep talking about you need to correct these ills and all these past things from Jim Crow to slavery because of its racist history. But apparently Spain didn't have a racist history. So it's inconsistencies, and I think a lot of that goes back to the cultural shift going to education, because they don't teach people in schools all of history. It's all slanted history. Like they talk about we need to have black history taught in schools. Well, the issue is really a complete picture of history, right? Good, the bad, and the ugly, as opposed, because when you put parameters around it, and you're teaching black history and Mexican history and white history or whatever, you're never going to be able to cover everything. So then you got your professors and your teachers picking and choosing what they want to teach, and you end up with these skewed curriculums that just say, like now in colleges you have people taking white privilege classes or Black Lives Matters classes and things of that nature, and you wonder what people are really learning. So, am I on time?
Well, you can just leave some time for questions. If
Okay.
you have a few more things to say, please.
I will open up for questions and, let that guide my conversation.
That's perfect. So, speaking of skewed curriculum, so for those who don't know, I'm a teacher. I teach out at Triton College, and I had one of my students mention in a statistics class, mentioned to me that in their social psychology class, their prof was offering extra credit to any guy that would come to class in a dress. Yes, you heard me correct.
What class was it though?
Social psychology.
Oh, okay.
And basically, if you're a male and you come dressed as a female, you will get some sort of extra credit. I don't know the details, but how in the world do we combat that? I don't know. I guess it works the same for the girls. If they show up dressed as a man, I guess they get extra credit too. I don't know how they can get around not doing that. But you see, my point is in higher education, that just seems that's almost the norm, in a strange way. Right. Do you have any thoughts?
But I think that's an issue. But I think it's kind of like with the issues in Chicago, because I got a nonprofit I'm working on, and I talk about the issues in Chicago, and I think no one focuses on this section of people. And these are obviously people who really care, and they're trying to figure out the problem, whether it be crime, unemployment, training people for jobs. And they start with these people like, what are we going to do with these people when they get out of jail? Because I know that's something that you care about, right? Which is all important. But nobody thinks about what do we do with the people from 5 to 12 before they get into the trouble to begin with, right? Catching them while they're young. And it's kind of like that. That's a big issue. But I write about in the book stuff that they're doing at the elementary and junior high school level, right? So at least if you train them right and you raise them to kind of learn how to make their own decisions and understand things, you could probably, find a way through that maze in college. But what do you do when you're 12, right? And your parents have got 2 kids that are young and they're focused on work and they don't have time to even look at the curriculum. And they find out the same thing happening in 5th and 6th grade, right? So in the book I talk about, it was the book talking about gender. And they say, so I use another gender example. So, I don't know what other people's views of, lesbian and gay and all that kind of stuff. It doesn't really matter. You should be free to do whatever you want to. And that's what most libertarians and most people who are free market people would believe. It's only when the government, infringes on it that we really care. But at the same time, it's a difference from, there was in the 80s, they say that there was a rash of gay bash. So that's obviously a physical crime and it's bad, but there's a big leap to say we need to stop that from happening, to saying, how do we stop this boy-girl thing, right? They're actually trying to fix boys and girls in this. It's really just boys. But they're saying that, okay, girls and boys are, there's nothing wrong with a boy playing with a doll. Nobody would say, see their kid, they shouldn't anyway, see their son with a doll. What are you doing? You're not a girl, right? But at the same time, there's a problem with you forcing it, right? So there's schools that are saying, no, we need to force boys to play with dolls and girls to play with trucks to see what happens when they get older. Why can't they just do whatever they feel like doing and you leave them alone? So my point to your question is, if we don't do anything about what's happening in elementary school, it won't matter what you do in college. Because it does for this generation, but a generation later they'll be lost, because that 18-year-old would have gone to school for 13 years of seeing that. And nobody's really addressing that. Yes, ma'am.
So I have 2 questions. One, have you heard of restorative justice here at John Marshall?
Have I heard about what?
Restorative justice here at John Marshall.
Mm-mm.
You should look into it. It deals with the kind of prevention of streamlining kind of crime-prone neighborhoods and the children that get into trouble in school, and kind of streamlining them.
Yeah, you need to give me in touch with somebody who's doing that. But go ahead, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry?
I said I definitely need to get in touch with whoever's doing that.
We
Judge Murphy.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, we need to talk.
Professor Singh.
Okay.
And the second question,
Thank you.
particularly with the transgender, letting children choose kind of what they want to do, because my personal take on it is I have reservations about just promoting giving young children hormones at such a young age, and kind of how you reconcile the freedoms of letting a child do whatever they want.
Now, but who are you talking about? Are you talking the government or are you talking about the parent?
Both.
Well, it's kind of hard to stop the parent from doing it. You kind of have to again, I mean, this is coming from so many lanes. It's so hard to address every one of these things.
Right.
But you kind of have to, I mean, so which battle do you want to fight? Do you want to stop the parent from doing it and hire attorneys and go and sue that parent and stop them from raising their own kid? Because then now, if I don't know if you're conservative or not, but now whatever your views are on something else, somebody may want to sue you and stop you from doing that. So that's getting down, that's miring down too deep. But I will say that, I'm sorry?
With public schools particularly, I think
Right.
the common kind of theme is to encourage.
Right, that's my only issue. If I'm not saying that that it doesn't exist, I do question the high percentage all of a sudden, because if it was natural, it would have been happening 10 years ago, right? That you can't just say last year, now more people coming out as possible, but not exponentially, 900 times. But if that's what they believe, that's fine. I don't have an issue with that. But you have to push back on the schools promoting it. We all have to agree that promoting it, even if you think it's good to promote it, you have to agree that promoting it is different from not stopping them from feeling some way and isolating them and treating them poorly.
And last follow-up question, so then where do you draw the line between bathroom usage then?
Between what?
Bathroom usage.
Well, what do you mean? If you need to use the bathroom, you go to the bathroom.
If you're transgender boy, transgender girl.
Then see, that's a good example. That's a perfect example. Because what I found in the two cases I followed is that we are getting to the point that we don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, that we're not using common sense. But I say that not because it's anti-trans, it's because some of these people are activists. They're not really trying to get their protection, right? So the people who support them are like, they should be protected, but they're missing the point that they're not trying to be protected, right? They want to be activists. So the boy in the suburbs here that said that I now identify as a girl and I want to use the washroom, so he wanted to go to the girls' room, and the girls were like, you also got to look at numbers, right? The girls in the school were like, we don't want them there. The teacher was like, that's not fair. So they sat down with boys like, we don't want to send you with the boys because you don't feel comfortable. We don't want to send you with the girls because they don't feel comfortable. We'll let you use the teacher's bathroom on your own. And they sued and said, no, I don't want to do that. Right. It's because you're an activist. If you really just wanted to not be forced to go to the washroom with boys because you don't feel like a boy, using a unisex washroom, how is that any different than them going to a unisex bathroom and putting all gender sticker on the door? It's no different. It's just that he wanted to sue and he wanted to make a point. So that's kind of different. I mean, I push back against that because you're trying to make a point. But you should try to accommodate. If you don't feel comfortable, I shouldn't try to force you to do something that you're not comfortable with. But I can't make you more important than the 17 girls in the class either. Right? I mean, that's not even, I don't understand how in today's climate that's political. That's just common sense. Nobody's dragging him to the boys' room, but the girl, so, the girls say they don't want you there, and now you don't want to be put in the boys' room, and now you're saying too bad to them. You say you want to treat those girls the same way you feel like you're being treated if you're forced to go to the boys' room. So, I mean, they should accommodate, but they should draw the line at, we're going to sue you if you force me to go to a unisex bathroom. Yes, ma'am.
I think your approach is very sensible and very fair.
However,
yes, however, we are, I think you'd have to be blind, and I know no one here is, not to recognize that what we're talking about, these attitudes, are not naturally evolving attitudes. They have been pushed and reinforced through multiple channels.
right.
There's the intellectual academic strain that's highly influenced by Marxism and postmodernism and a whole bunch of gobbledygook.
Entertainment, business.
Yes, and then the entertainment world comes in and reinforces, and then the media comes in and reinforces, and then you've got the universities, which historically used to be places for people to exchange ideas, for open, calm discussions, for the free exchange of ideas. Now, they're thought police factories that refuse to have speakers that trigger people.
So we all see that,
and so the problem is, this trickles down. I happen to know a number of families where their children perfectly happy children are getting peer pressure to move towards being a lesbian or transgender. I mean, they're getting peer pressure in this direction. It's not that they are naturally feeling a need in that direction, but they're being pushed that way.
But where are the parents?
So that's where the
But when I was in
numbers-
school, I was peer pressured to do and sell drugs. I didn't.
Right, but you've got a lot.
You can never control peer pressure. You're never going to be able to control peer pressure.
But when that peer pressure is reinforced by influential figures like
How old are
Hollywood-
these children you're talking about?
Pardon?
How old are the children that you're
Well,
talking
this young girl started in like early high school.
So like 14,
that her
15 years
friends
old?
were pushing. Pardon?
about? Like 14, 15 years old?
Yeah, yeah.
The parents need to be involved. There's nothing else
Her
you can do.
parents are extremely involved. Her
Okay.
parents couldn't have.
Then she should be
these are-
fine.
Pardon?
You're not going to turn anybody into a lesbian. She'll be fine.
Well, no, but I mean, the problem is that it's hard I'm saying that there's an awful lot of kids these days who don't have that kind of secure self-esteem or security, and
Yeah.
that, we've got to be aware that there's an actual war going on if you want to.
But you got to fight the fight that you can fight and make an impact on. You can't really make an impact on
Well, I
something.
think we do have to start with the schools where we can at least try to influence the curriculum and the treatment of kids where it's not pushing them in, just one
I think
current fad direction.
I don't want to hold
Just
up any other
for
questions.
most time, are there any students who have to leave the class that want to ask a question first before Mark does?
My question was, I was a student once. That's pretty
No, we mean current.
Yeah.
Okay, Mark, go ahead.
It was very different.
Did you cut him off? He was first.
Yeah, I had a question.
Yes.
Are you familiar at all with the, what is it, the implicit association test?
Yes.
Have you heard, I only know this because my mom's a head shrinker, but,
That was a Harvard test, right?
Controversy behind it, like.
That was a Harvard test, right?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Like where they try and associate like good words.
Yep.
and with,
Oh,
like,
what's his
they
name?
measure the-
What's the guy who writes the books? You know, Peter. What's his name? The guy who writes the books.
Which one?
All the books about like 10,000 shots, 10,000 hours. Come on.
No.
Everybody, come on. It starts with an
I
M.
know what you mean.
I just read about it today. I was looking at
Oh, really?
Dr. Phil?
Who? That doesn't. Dr. Phil does not start with an M. Malcolm Gladwell.
Yes, okay.
Now you know what I'm talking about. Yeah, he wrote about those tests too. Yeah, in one of his books. Yeah. What were you asking about it?
I just thought it was interesting because, people say that like they have such a lot of liberals and things like that have really expansive definitions of what's racist, and they talk about like institutionalized racism and like subconscious racism. And I was trying to figure out where that came from, and I found out about this test, and I found out, through my mom, that there's a lot of controversy about the methodology behind the test and some of the statistical. Like, they have a problem with some of the repeatability of the test, right? You walk in one day, you get one the result, and that same person walks in the next day, takes a test, gets like a completely different.
Well, it sounds like all these problems are going back to school, whether it's at the secondary level or in college, because what they're doing now is a lot. You get your tenured professor and you're doing research. You used to be able to do whatever you wanted to do. You can take whatever test you want to do. You can run anything up the flagpole you want it. But when you get done, you're ready to present it. We peer test it, right? And that's how we decide whether it's true or not. Now some of the schools are like, we don't really like where you're going, so we won't even let you do it.
Well, C.S. Lewis talked a little bit about it. It's like fake science. Like, science should inform your view, and not you shouldn't bend science or whatever to your political view. And that's what I feel like that's an example of what's going on. If we have this opinion now, we got to do something.
I mean, that's the reason why I my focus is not, my biggest thing to conservatives is to stop only speaking to conservatives, because you just brought out a bunch of different things you talked about schools, you're talking about indoctrination, all this other stuff you got to worry about, right?
Yeah.
We're not going to win that fight only talking to us. It's like, I mean, the actual right, conservative, fully conservative constitutionalist. It's a smaller group of people than those who are like, who before Obama was elected was just watching the Kardashians. They didn't even know what was going on, right? So you have a lot of people who can vote and a lot of people who could assist in this shift or stop the shift to the left that are just like unplugged, that aren't paying attention, right? Or that think they agree with the left because they're like, oh, Ted Cruz, Sean Hannity, this, right? But then nobody's talking to them and saying, well, what do you think about Antifa? What do you think about the people who attack this? What do you think about raising taxes and are the police in certain areas? Or what do you think about these certain issues? And most of them they'll agree with you on some things, they'll still disagree, but they'll be more nuanced. So why aren't we engaging them? That's the issue. Yes, Mark?
Do you live in Chicago?
You know I do. No, I'm not running for mayor, Mark.
Yeah, you're to run for mayor of Chicago if you live in Chicago.
I do live in Chicago.
My point more is that you would get the conservative message out where no one of the 17 candidates are talking about things you're talking about.
That's true. I can run
I vote for you.
Yeah.
I got 2 votes.
Hey, yeah, like,
Why isn't every hand up?
I'll vote for you twice.
He beat you to it.
Actually, I have a question.
Oh, okay.
I'm not gonna vote for you, I just have a question. So you mentioned, like a cultural change, a shift in the political landscape, I guess. What do you see as the root causes culturally that's changing it? Like what are those drivers that are shifting the culture?
Well,
And how much
we're
of it is
more-
natural and how much of it is a pumped artificial kind of attitude?
Right. Well, with more time, I mean, like obviously when you go in the book, I do start a little bit further back. I think most of it is like a culmination of 3 factors. And it's the same movement to the left that was happening in the 60s, right? It's just really slow. So you had, you know, the middle class bourgeois kids, right, whose parents had it tough because they were World War II babies, and they're like, my kids are gonna have it better than I did, right? So they gave their kids everything, right? So then the next generation had a kind of different point of view, and they're like, oh, that's stuffy, that's boring, so let's go a different way. It's just too confining, right? Too constraining. We need to have more freedom, this free love, do whatever you want. So they moved away from religion, which is part of it, right? So you don't even have to be religious. You can be, but moving away from the values that are attached to that is an issue. So as a country, we started to move away from that, right? And then we had the less, you know, obviously the Moynihan issue, the single parents and all that stuff. And in media, we don't know which, the chicken or the egg, which came first, but you had that. So we had this cultural shift, but then we had TV shows and movies that were not like now they kind of glorify, but they weren't really glorifying it then. But I honestly think they had good intentions. Like they noticed that there were more single mothers, and they wanted to show that people noticed that, and single mothers can still be strong and be positive. So they started putting single mothers on TV. I work, but I still take care of my kids and all that other kind of stuff. But then what it also did to some was like, you know, I'm not shaming anymore. You used to have a baby, remember? Back in the 60s and the early 70s, you have a baby when you're a teen, and you went away to visit your aunt or to go to camp, and you came back and your mother had another kid, right? They were hiding it. Now you get pregnant at 13 and your mother throw a party. It's like, oh, grandmother, I'm 31. So all that makes a difference. You might think for that one family it's no big difference. That's your deal. But when it starts to shift the culture and everybody does it, then there's no shame to it. Well, shame is good. That's why. Look at Japan. Love Japan. Went on vacation to Japan. Japan is mostly a secular society, but they don't have the problems we have because they have a heavy, strong guilt part of their culture. Right? They shame you. Right? So we don't have that because we want to be the melting pot. So we want to be multiple religions, races, you know, people from every different country. So we're not monolithic, which is why it always, you know, it's not fair when the left, the Bernie Sanders wing, wants to say we should be like Denmark. Well, Denmark has 1/63 of the population. They're all the same religion and they're all the same race. So obviously, it's easy to do that there. So Japan is like that, but Japan are starting to have some of the problems we have, but they don't have a lot of the cultural problems because they have a different kind of culture. Their culture goes back years. It's the same culture, and it's real. I mean, you throw trash on the ground in Japan, and there'll be hell to pay, right? So it's different. So I think that the culture shifted from all those different things. Like people just got to the point that it's just not my business. Like, you know, the community used to be like, you know, you got a group of kids in the neighborhood and one kid does something bad and the neighbor's mom would spank you. When I was little, like my neighbor's mother would spank me, not take me to, my mother would spank me. Now, you know, you're gonna catch a case. So everybody's like, we're so litigious that people are just like, well, I'm not gonna get involved. So I'll talk to my friends and family about the crazy neighbor, but he can do whatever he wants to. I don't even care. You're yeah! Sounds like he's burning cats. Oh well, let me turn the TV on. Right? Nobody cares about what anybody else is doing. They're like, who am I to judge? I agree with you, but who am I to judge? So if you do that and then you start to pile on all these things and they start to multiply, it just kind of grew from there.
I understand you live in Chicago, so are you like doing any are you connected to any not-for-profits here, or are you involved in the
Yes,
school
right.
system at all, like volunteering or speaking there?
What's the last part?
Involved with speaking maybe at elementary schools and high schools?
I am working on schools. If you can get me in elementary school, colleges are easier, but I am trying. I'm working on a bunch of schools, but most of them are colleges. You got to have an end to get into the other schools. Make that happen. But as far as the nonprofits, most of them are more like domestic violence and like trying to help people from homelessness and poverty to get back into the workforce and things of that nature. Yeah.
The reason why I asked is because I'm very concerned about our culture right now, because right now all they're hearing is one idea because it's the loudest and it's everywhere that they turn. And our country is supposed to be a place of free-flowing ideas and various viewpoints and perspectives, but lately we're turning into one perspective by and large, and so that's why.
Right, but let me ask you this question: Do you know in your circle of friends and family, do you know people who, because it's all one-sided, kind of agree with that one side?
A lot of people.
Okay, that you know.
Yes,
Right. Now, but here's I just want to make sure you could think of people in your mind. Now, would they listen to my message?
Yes. Believe it or not, most of the people in my circle, even if they vote one way or the other, they're pretty much have conservative views. The reason why they may not vote for a particular party or not, a lot of times has to do with, the lack of acknowledgement of hurt or understanding. They talk.
It's because that party doesn't, let's not say one or the other. We know which party it is. It's because that party doesn't show up, which is my point.
Yes,
Because they don't show up.
Because
I won't say any names, but if you know any prominent conservatives in this area, in the Chicagoland area, I've talked to all of them. And we've had those conversations, and they say, yes, we will, or they'll say after the election. If they say after the election, they might as well just say, go screw yourself. Because because there's always an election. So basically they're saying never. But we need enough of a voice and enough people to convince them to do it, because to them it's a cost benefits analysis, right? Am I going to take the time, because I got so many irons in the fire, whether it's a radio show or I'm running off, or I'm a political, or I'm in office, do I have time to go down there and do that if nobody's going to, and they don't want to talk to 20 people, right? Unless they're trying to get votes. So that's the issue. So that's my push, and that's what I just try to continue to make happen.